a judge upheld an old law that was over 109 years old. Most people think, well, a 109-year-old law, what is so important about this one particular law? That we got lots of laws. This particular one, he upheld a vaccination law because these parents wanted to let their students come to a public school without being vaccinated. Now, there are some situations where a person can send their child to school unvaccinated if they have some religious objection. They don't have to prove it, but they have to have some kind of written thing out explaining why it's against the religion, or if they have a bad reaction to the medication for whatever reason. And now this particular judge, like I said, these families, they wanted to send their kids to school, and they said, you know what, you're just not going to do it. And I'm just so glad that the judge upheld this ban, because this ban originally went into place when measles was a big thing and people were just getting it in major groups. It was just everywhere. So if you don't want to vaccinate your kids, as far as I'm concerned, you can keep your kids home, or you can send them to a Christian school where they say, well, you don't want to vaccinate your kids, go ahead. We'll just take them in. Then you can just get sick, and we're going to keep the rest of the healthy people in one location. Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, so he actually upheld a ruling from Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which was from 1905. What had happened in that case, essentially, is that a man was imposed a $5 fine in Massachusetts in 1905 for disobeying an order to vaccinate during a smallpox outbreak. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld the ruling, saying that he could be fined for refusing to get that vaccination during an outbreak, finding that in times of an outbreak or an epidemic like that, the government has the right to legislate on medical necessity, and saying people should be able to do it. The interesting thing about this is that when they went through and they started citing this old law, it only took them 6 pages of going through this old case before they just said, yep, okay, done. Like, it's so remarkable of a story because it was such an unremarkable court case.
Right.
It essentially didn't matter what the arguments were on any side, because their arguments were completely invalid because they have no right to argue.
Right.
If there's an outbreak or an epidemic in a school, the government, according to this, since it was upheld in the Supreme Court in 1905, has the right to say, you either have to get vaccinated, or in this case, they said, stay home from school. You can't come in. I mean, it's herd vaccination. It takes 95% of a population in order to actually have a safe population in the case of vaccinations.
Right.
Private schools in New York, according to this, well, actually, I'm on a different article from the same story, but according to this, private schools have roughly 70%, and so they don't even have enough to have herd immunization.
Right. Because because if there's someone who was in the chat room, Karn was saying in the chat room, he's like, well, if just one kid doesn't get vaccination, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal, because if you get enough,
it's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal, because the fact is, even if that one kid comes in with measles, even though that someone else is vaccinated, sometimes the vaccinations don't always take, or they're not super effective, or they're just they're weakened, or if someone just comes in, hey, they got the sniffles, it weakens their immune system, so they can get it even though they've got a vaccine for it.
Yeah, depending on the vaccination or the vaccine, it's only 80 to 90% effective in the first place. So we're dependent on herd immunization in order to protect the entire population, not including kids who have medical reasons why they can't be vaccinated. The last major outbreak that happened was traced back to one unvaccinated child.
Right.
That's the issue, is when you have one unvaccinated child, that puts the entire population at risk.
Right.
There's no conspiracy here. It is sound science. Vaccinations work. When we eradicated smallpox with vaccinations, that was considered the single greatest scientific achievement of an entire generation. We eradicated a disease that was killing a population, and it was an astounding feat of medical science. And today, we're so far removed from that achievement that people forget what it was like to have polio and smallpox and measles epidemics. And now there's all this misinformation out there that's leading people to believe that, well, vaccinations are bad in this way, because they don't understand the science behind them and don't understand that vaccinations in the FDA and the medical world, they have been studied more than any other medication that's out there.
Right.
They've been brought, total scrutiny, and it's amazing how much they've been studied.
Right.
So it's just absurd when people are anti-vaccine. It's absolutely anti-science. People just need to be more educated and not trust websites that are just perpetuated by a bunch of moms who have absolutely zero scientific knowledge whatsoever.
Exactly.
And, go by the medical recommendations. And vaccinations are important if you care about the health and well-being of yourself and everyone else in the population.
Right, exactly. Now, I just want to clarify, because Carntha said I didn't represent what he said. I'm going to read verbatim what he said. He said, if an unvaccinated kid goes to school, the vaccinated kids aren't going to get sick. And I basically just paraphrased what he said there. So
right, yeah, that's untrue, though. I mean, the
Right.
vaccinated children can still get sick, and vaccinations aren't 100% effective. Just like with any medication. There's every medication that's out there. There's nothing that's 100%.
Right. It's you can't stick your head, unless you're going to take your kid and stick him inside a spacesuit, and then send him off to school every day. Then even that's not 100% right there.
Right. So I mean, it's important for everyone to vaccinate, because we are reliant on everyone vaccinating in order to keep these diseases at bay.
Exactly. As you said, it's a herd thing, because this way, even if you just get the one, it's still possible to affect the many. It's not rocket science, So if you want to keep your kids unvaccinated, you can keep them out of the school. Or send them to a school where they say, yeah, bring your unvaccinated children here, and we'll end up shutting the school down, because the fact is, well, hell, everybody's dead. Because
by the way, one of the other precedents that's set by this instance in New York is that we now understand better that religious and philosophical objections to vaccinations are not a right.
That's right.
The government is basically giving people they're being lenient by allowing these kinds of exemptions. The government totally has the right, according to our law, to say that we need for everyone to get vaccinated.
Right. Look at
these exemptions are they're allowing certain leeway for religious groups and for philosophical reasons. Mm-hmm. The only reason that's legitimate to not vaccinate your child is if a doctor has given you a legitimate medical reason, such as an allergy to an ingredient. Right,
exactly. There was, earlier this year, there was a church down in Texas that some people came back from Africa from doing their missionary work, and they all got the measles. And the pastor there was saying, don't vaccinate your children, until the whole freaking congregation was basically sick. And he's like, I suppose you could vaccinate your children. He did a 180. That's what happens with a lot of these religious folks, is the fact is that, they say they think their God is going to protect them from diseases. Sorry, buddy, that fucking doesn't work like that.
Well, that's why, that the Amish population has recently had measles outbreaks. Mm-hmm. And now, within the past few weeks, Amish people, despite the fact that the Amish have religious objections to it, despite that fact, they recognize that vaccines work, and they're lining up to get vaccinations. Good. Because they can't control the outbreaks in their populations any longer.
Yeah, that prayer shit doesn't work, does it? Never did, and it's certainly not going to work against no diseases. That's for sure. Crystal, your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to applaud this Judge Kuntz for upholding this. People need to get educated. There is a lot of fear-mongering when it comes to vaccinations, and unfortunately, we are all so tuned into media, and I think the mass majority of people, especially when you're a parent, you hear these scary things and you tend to believe them. And instead, we really need to research into this stuff and know the facts. This judge apparently does. It's really interesting. We're going to see a lot more of this. And as you both have alluded to, that there has been massive outbreaks, resurgence, smallpox, measles, these things will not only make your children sick, it will have a lot of dead babies, folks.
Oh,
if
yeah.
these vaccinations do not continue. People are using the religious exemption. It's not because they're religious, not necessarily, but that's a good reason, because they're scared.
Right.
Because they've been scared. It's going to cause your baby to be autistic.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not. There has never been a link established. People need to quit listening to Jenny McCarthy on The View run her mouth about this stuff and really sit down and read about this. Read this. It has not been that long ago, folks, that polio was rampant. It's not been that long ago that we eradicated it. It's coming back now.
Mm-hmm.
And this judge just did a wonderful job. I found this really interesting. One of these ladies that quoted a religious exemption, I have to say is the first that I have heard of it. She says at first that it caused food and milk allergies and rashes and infections in the baby. But then she goes on to say that disease is pestilence. And pestilence is from the devil. The devil is germs and disease, which is cancer, and all of these other things that can take you down. But if you trust in the Lord, these things cannot come near you. And we all know that's not true, even those of us that are religious.
Yes.
Vaccinations work. Your right to not vaccinate your child should not infringe on my child's 14th Amendment right to equal protection.
Right.
The end. And the government has got the power to quarantine masses of people.
Oh, yeah, they can. If they need to, they can set up in a heartbeat.
These folks just need to know that it's going to come to that. If some great education program does not come out of this vaccination versus the anti-vaccine people, it's going to come to that.
Right.
Homeschool your children if you are absolutely not going to vaccinate them.
Right.
Other than that, there is no sense. One child can infect an entire school, an entire community.
Yep. Dawkins Dog sent me a great graphic here that says pre-vaccine era estimated how many people died in the U.S. Now, since we're just talking about measles, before the people were getting vaccines, over 530,217 people in the U.S. annually. Now, it's down to 61. That's huge. We've eradicated by 99%. Diphtheria, completely eradicated, 100%. And polio, gone completely, 100%. Although that's at least just here in the United States. I have heard stories where in certain countries, like in Africa, whatever, polio is starting to make a comeback because they're not vaccinating. And there are people out there are taking the people who are trying to get these places, the people out there vaccinated, and they're killing them. And like Doctors Without Borders or whatever, they're taking out and they're just taking them out, because they think that they're poisoning their children, and they just don't realize that if we want to keep disease from spreading around the whole globe, you have to vaccinate against the stuff we do know about. So when we find stuff that we don't know about, then we can try to figure out what it is and take care of it at that time.
Protect your kids.
Right, exactly. Anybody have last things they want to say on this?
Amen.
Yeah, if you're going to research vaccinations, don't Google vaccinations. The term should be immunizations.
Right.
You'll find a lot more. Typically, anti-vaccine people will write articles under the term vaccination, whereas peer-reviewed studies often use the term immunization.
Right.
I find that to be something that certainly helps when you're looking into information on this sort of thing.
Exactly. And
also check, if you're using a website to look into that sort of stuff, check the disclaimer on the website. If it says consult the CDC before trusting this information, then assume that you should consult what the CDC says before you trust that information.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.